Ja, så er klokken blevet 8. Godmorgen alle sammen. Og på vegne af det nationale netværk for klimatilpasning vil jeg gerne byde rigtig hjertelig velkommen til det her sidste Godmorgen med DNNK. Det sidste arrangement her inden sommerferien, inden vi så starter op på ny igen i august måned. I dag har vi fokus på naturbaserede løsninger, og vi har været så heldige, at vi har fået besøg af Cynthia Quintana fra Syddansk Universitet. Hun er lektor der, og hun har lavet noget forskning, blandt andet omkring effekterne af brug af naturbaserede løsninger i forbindelse med sin klimatilpasning. Cynthia vil blandt andet også komme ind på brugen af naturbaserede løsninger i forbindelse med klimatilpasning. Hvorfor er det godt at bruge? Og så vil hun til sidst komme med et lille teaser for et nyt projekt, de vil til at arbejde på sammen med en række andre partnere, et EU-projekt omkring en lille vejledning, handbook om brug af netop naturbaserede løsninger. Jeg skal sige, at Cynthia hun kommer til at holde sit oplæg på engelsk. Det var cirka en halv times tid, og når hun er færdig, så vil det være tid til at stille spørgsmål. Det er I velkommen til at gøre på dansk. Hun forstår godt dansk, men hun vil svare på engelsk. I må gerne enten stille spørgsmål ved at unmute jeres mikrofon, og så stille spørgsmål der, eller stille spørgsmål ude i chatten, og så vil Anne, min kollega, holde øje herude med, hvad der kommer af spørgsmål der. Men imens at Cynthia holder sit oplæg, må jeg meget gerne have jeres mikrofon slukket, sådan at der ikke kommer til at være nogen forstyrrelser. Jeg skal også lige sige her til sidst, at vi som sagt optager det her webinar, så vi kan lægge det op på vores hjemmeside, og folk, der ikke har set det, eller havde mulighed for at deltage her, kan komme ind og se det på et andet tidspunkt. Tak skal du have. Men så tror jeg sådan set, at vi er klar, og jeg vil give ordet videre til dig, Cynthia. Værsgo, du må gerne dele din præsentation.
Thank you very much, Christian. And my microphone is a bit low, so if you want to hear good, so just screw up your volume in your head settings. I'm going to find my presentation. It's loading. I hope you can all see my presentation now.
Yes, we see it fine.
Good. Okay, thank you, Christian, for the introduction. And as Christian say, I'm going to talk about nature-based solutions, and this here is with focus on coastal adaptation. How can we use coastal and marine ecosystems to integrate in these solutions? And this landscape photo here is one of my favorite projects, which is Strand in Poland, here in Finland, where we have made a climate adaptation project in that sense. I'm going to talk about and show more results of this project in my presentation later. Okay, and you can find my contact information here. You're welcome to write me if you have any more questions after today. So the plan for this presentation is stated here. I'm gonna just give you some background. What is it? Nature-based solutions, just to give you some idea what we're talking about. We hear this concept in a lot of conversations, but there is actually a definition of it. Then I'm gonna go through some case studies in Denmark here of nature-based solutions regarding coastal adaptation. Then I'm going to show how to monitor after implementing these coastal adaptation solutions, which kind of indicators you have to look at. And I'm going to also give a little teaser, as Christian said, of the EU Commission mini book I have been invited to participate as a guide for practitioners. And I'll give you a summary of this presentation later. So, let's start. Why bother? Why we have to think about nature-based solutions? And this is the concept that has been created by a group of experts back in 2005, and now is becoming really a buzzword. But that's because we are facing a climate crisis and a biodiversity crisis. And we have to address this in some way or another. So EU have encouraged also a lot of projects to include nature-based solutions in the goals, and it addresses straightforward the EU climate adaptation and mitigation strategy. By 2050, we have to reduce our emissions in 70%, right? Denmark is also part of it. We have to also think about biodiversity strategy. We need to, for example, in the coastal and the seas, have 10% of the area that is strictly protected. And often, when you talk about climate, biodiversity is also related to it very much, because I can give you some example. If you think about in the land, we have the trees. If you remove those trees, we're gonna have CO2 emissions and you're gonna lose habitats for species. So they're very connected. And when you restore, when you plant trees again, you are capturing CO2 again and giving room for many species to live. So they're very connected. So if you address one, you're also addressing another one. Another reason to think about nature-based solutions is because you have to think about sustainability. So they are also connected to the sustainable development goals. So if you are thinking about a city needs to grow or to make a climate adaptation plan, it has to be sustainable. You cannot make a coastal adaptation by increasing the CO2 emissions or by polluting even more the area. So you have to think that has to be sustainable. And the nature-based solutions, at least when you think about coastal adaptation, they cover all these sustainable goals here. They are addressing directly the climate action, life below water, because you are creating habitats for species to grow there, life on land, because there is a continuity between land and sea. In this transition, we have a lot of good and important habitats. They have to be integrated in the cities and communities. It can be in more settlements, not countryside, but also cities. And it has to have a good design, so we are working a lot with different experts to find the best design for this kind of solutions. So nature-based solutions is a holistic approach. You have to think that every time you have to implement a structure, or for example, as a coastal adaptation, it has to include nature in some way or another. But it's not only that, you have to talk with your local communities and hear what is the concerns, because they know much more of the nature, because they are living there than the experts. So we have to include all the cultural aspects on it as well. But that's what they call a holistic approach, because you have to hear experts, local communities, and different stakeholders, authorities, all working together for the best solution. So if we look here in the center, I don't know if you can see my pointer. And somebody with the microphone. Thank you. So here, where we have the center as nature-based solutions, is restoration of ecosystems, protection, which will lead to higher biodiversity, and biodiversity will give you greenhouse gas reduction, erosion control, coastal defense, so on and so forth, which will contribute with a better human being and sustainable development in the long run. This is the last about nature-based solution, but it's just to tell you that it's an ongoing process. More we do, more we learn about it. It's not easy to work with nature because nature is very unpredictable. But that's why it's complex, and we have to talk with different people. Especially when you are planning, you have to, before you implement, you have to hear more that you can, the local communities, the experts, and different kinds of actors that are related to that area. So engaging stakeholders is really important, and the co-designing that we call and co-management of these areas is really the core of nature-based solutions. And it's what they are recommending by EU level. So now I'm gonna talk about our case studies, and I will present some our major project, which is Strand in Boense, and this is also one of my favorite projects because we have been working really hard on it, collecting all kinds of data. It was also the first this kind where it was a managed realignment. We have breached the dikes and flowed a large area of about 214 hectares. Is corresponding 2 kilometers of coast and is implemented, and here has a little star because that is where I'm going to show the results and indicators that we use. There is another one that is Strand in Boense. We are working in collaboration with Boense municipality. It's 27 hectares, a little small coast, about 0.8 kilometers, and it's also implemented. It was implemented in end of 2020, and we started monitoring now in 2022. So I don't have a lot of results to show, but if you're interested, just let me know. We are measuring some things there. Then there is 2 other idea projects where I have worked with some municipalities in Violet to inspire as an inspiration for what kind of nature-based solutions you can apply in the harbor area and in an area just close by the waves, the buildings, the waves. And then we have the Living Coast. That was a joint vision to, I think, 4 municipalities in Ama, covering about 38 kilometers of coast, which is in the phase of discussions now. So in different phases, these case studies. And one thing I want to stress here is that the larger is the area you do, the better is the benefit in regarding coastal protection and the potential of nature to deliver this natural coastal protection, right? By retaining the fine sediments and giving room for species to live. So that's very important to think, but it's also important when you have small areas that maybe a lot of these small areas together, they will account also for something good. So we have to think in this way. So scale is very important. If the area is small, maybe implementing a lot of small ones will make a difference. So here we have Strand is a project between SDU and Oviensen Foundation. Oviensen Foundation bought this area in North Green. And that's how it looked here. You can see the fields, and here were the dikes. Can you see my cursor? No?
Yes.
Okay, good. So here the dikes were just here. And that's how it looked before in 2013. And then after managed realignment, we removed the dikes and the water came in here. So this practice, it calls managed realignment, where you design the coast. So you remove the dikes and you build new dikes inland here, which is some much higher, 3 meters, protecting these farmers that live close by here. And the design was smart because we heard the Danish Ornithology Foundation that we need room for the birds. So some small islands will also build here in the lagoon to provide nests for the birds. So these are just photos. I will show some results later on. Here is Strand in Boense, and it was done also by the same practice, managed realignment. They have removed some small summer dikes here. I think it's half-meter dikes, and let the area be flooded in November 2020. So this area that is grazed now is going to look like this, with some marshes that will grow in some time. So we're going to follow this change, and we're going to follow diversity and also greenhouse gases, how this is changing the dynamics in the area, and everything else in the ecology as well. And that's how it looks from above. The line, the orange line here is the old dikes that were removed, and the blue one is the new dikes that has been built inland. So with time, all this area will be flooded, and the tidal marshes of the DNNK, they will grow here and provide the benefits of coastal protection. They hold a lot of fine sediments, and they also sequester a lot of CO2, which is good in a climate context. Here I just wanted to show a little bit provocative slide, but there is potential for scaling up. This practice of managed realignment is a bit scary because you're removing dikes and you're leaving the water to come in, but you're also building dikes a bit more inland dikes that we call. So you're not removing them completely, you're just building them behind and giving some more room for the nature, marine nature to come. And all these red areas here, they are previous reclaimed land for agriculture, but they were coastal areas before. So they sum up about 450 square kilometers. And if you respect of course, there are people living there, and there may be some infrastructure. But if you take them out of the equation, a lot of areas can still be turned into coastal adaptation projects in that sense, and can give good CO2 benefits. I'm going to show you later about this. Also, because these agriculture fields, they are not so profitable. You have to drain these areas all the time. There is influence of salinity, so why not return these to the coastal areas? And I know there is a lot of regulations, Natura 2000 areas, that is a problem, but EU is really trying to make a uniform approach to easier regarding permission and regulations when you want to do a coastal adaptation project. So the Valid Idea competition, I was advisory board, and they also want to implement the nature-based solution concept. And this is just to show you what happened to Violet Fjord, what it looked in the beginning before the city will grow. It was coastal meadows. You can see that they are a little bit elevated in this painting, which was really, really nice. So the function that they have is a sponge function, right? They are retaining all the sediments and providing a natural coastal protection for the fjord. And of course, when you build a harbor and a lot of concrete comes, so you lose all these benefits, but it's always the trade-off. We need to grow as well, right? So they're thinking how to rebuild the harbor area, and a project that was Josephine Philipsen. She's from Sweden, and she invite the water in some cases, and had some green areas with salt marsh plants. And this harbor area will also be adaptable with time in different climate scenarios. And it was mostly working as a sponge, trying to mimic what it was there before. And this winning project was also the only one that used different experts, architects, engineers, biologists, and I think anthropologists all together to think about the best solution. There was also another one from Superflex where they built structures, pink structures. They are artists, so in these structures you will have tidal marshes to grow on them and create life again. So it's just to inspire how you can do this kind of nature-based solutions in the coast. They're gonna work on the implementation, I think, this year and next year. Then we had the living coast, how to use nature-based solutions in 4 municipalities in AMA. It doesn't work if you make a higher dike in one municipality that is bordering another municipality and the other one decided to not do the same. The sea will come in the same way for everyone. So you have to work in a unified approach to this. So here in Castrostran, there is already eelgrass in the deeper areas, but they thought eelgrass, that is a type of grasses that grows under the water, would be also restored in shallower areas. And eelgrass as such doesn't provide a coastal adaptation in that sense, but a wave attenuation. So the waves will not come so strong in the coast and will also prevent erosion in some way or another and will make room for a lot of biodiversity. So that's what they thought it could be done in that sense. And I was also joining these discussions. And there was also an interesting one in Dreher where we thought about, there was a dike here in this area, how this area will look in time together with some partners here in Smith Innovation Share. We also thought that managed realignment could be interesting in this area by building the dike, removing from here, but putting more inland. So this is just ideas now, it's not implemented, but it's a good way of thinking about how you can integrate nature in your coastal adaptation projects. So now after implementing, we have to think about monitoring and evaluating. And of course, in the beginning, we have to, I will always recommend that you have a group of experts helping, because the first years after implementations is where things goes out of control. So, and you need to know, okay, is this going to continue or is this going to stop at some point? So these targets here is something that has to be defined on the planning phase. For example, in a coastal adaptation project, you have to think about sustainability. We want to avoid nuisance. We don't want that bad things happen. We want to boost the ecosystem services that we talk about, coastal protection, the nutrient filtration, the plants, they take all those excess nutrients. We want to have CO2 storage. We want to have reduced greenhouse gas emissions. We want to have biodiversity. We don't want invasive species. We want better water quality and, of course, societal well-being. So these are the targets on nature-based solutions in that sense. Indicators, I often say the Water Framework Directive indicators to monitor the coastal areas, they are already good and they include light, penetration and chlorophyll, but there are some additional ones that we have to follow at least very closely in the first years after the project is implemented to see if this is going in the right direction. So we have a species number of flora and fauna, vegetation and animals. We have coverage area of vegetation. For example, when you're working with salt marshes, we need to know, are they growing, are they spreading? So a coverage area is good. If you are planting something, survival of plants, of course, that's obvious. Other services like carbon storage and nitrogen storage is also interesting to know. And somehow you also need to monitor the greenhouse gases. Is this beneficial or not in a climate perspective? Later on in the process, food provision is also important. Is this in the coast providing more mussels that can be eaten and small fish that is food for larger fish? So there is also impact in that sense. And then we have the socio-economic aspects of it. If you have a recreation in your nature-based solution, then you have more societal engagement, and you can also boost the local economy in some way or another. So I'm going to show some of the indicators that we use in Green Coastal Lagoon. Often I will talk about west and east because we monitor these two areas very closely. And when we started this project, we were like, okay, what to expect when you are working with nature? And we draw this graph here. Here in the x-axis, we have time after implementation, and then we have ecological conditions, bad and good. So we thought it was going to go up and down, and it actually did. It followed this very up and down curve that we have drawn here. And first that we had was a bloom of green algae because we flooded agriculture soil, and agricultural soil has lots of leftover of fertilizers. But this was only in the first year. After the second year, nothing happened. But then again, we were surprised. Again, after 2 years, we had a bloom of cyanobacteria, and that also disappeared after the second year. And now it's going towards good ecological conditions where other species of plants and animals are coming and colonizing. And another thing is that nature takes time. When you make a coastal adaptation, for example, this, that you breach dikes and let the water come in again, it will be the hydrological, the water dynamics is going to be fast. It's about 5 years, it's going to reestablish fast. The biological restoration take about 5 to 20 years. And the geological restoration about 60 years. So and this is just a summary of this kind of nature-based solution. So it can take even longer. But here is just to give you an idea of the scale of time that we're talking about here. Okay, in Greenstein, we count the number of algae that appears in that west and east part that I showed before, and that is a good indicator to know is the species increasing. We want more species as possible. And if you follow the red line here, we started with 2 species, and right now this up and down here is actually, when it's winter, it's very low, when it's summer, it's very high. But if you consider the summer here, 4 species, now we are more than double here. So we are steadily increasing the number of species, which is really great. So it takes time. Then we have animals, benthic animals, the ones that lives in the bottom. We count them, and if we look the worms, it started really good when we opened the dikes. Then it went really down because of the blooms of algae we had. But now it's going back again to normal conditions. But the mussels, if you look here in the left, they are not doing really well because it was agricultural soil, and we have a lot of resuspension of small particles in the water. So they are having more problems on living in the lagoon. But with time, these fine sediments, they're gonna be washed out, and then these mussels can come again. But we're actually doing something else in the lagoon now that will help the mussels to come back, where we are putting sand on top of these sediments in some areas to see if they can come back. And here we also do the species numbers. As you can see in the top here, the west and the east. The east is not doing very well, but the dashed lines is the reference numbers of species that we are hoping for. So we are approaching in the west, but in the east, not so much. And there is also a diversity index that is showing the same trend. So there's a lot of discussion today of carbon and CO2 and what are the benefits. And when you have agricultural soil, the oxygen that we breathe or air goes all the way, and you can see it's very brown. So, and oxygen is very good on decomposing the material, the organic material that is there. So we have a lot of CO2 coming out of this decomposition. But when you float these agricultural soils, everything becomes black, the oxygen is very limited, so you have less CO2 coming out. So you have some benefits when you do that. You stop these high CO2 emissions. And that's exactly what we saw in Grunstein. So before flooding Grunstein, where it was farmland, we had about 12,000 tons of CO2 emissions per year. So just after the first year of flooding, we had 3,000. And now in 2000, from 2019 until today, the lagoon is CO2 neutral. And actually is taking up about 1,000 of CO2 in the lagoon because some algae grow on top of the soil. But again, we had to consider the lake. We also restore a freshwater lake. So here we have the coastal lagoon and we have Ensu, which is a freshwater lake. There is no salt water here. And we had a problem. We had methane emission. So the lake here had also CO2 benefits. It was not releasing a lot of CO2 the same way as the coastal lagoon, but we had methane coming out. And in so much that we could measure by the bubbles. So here is the year, January to December, and it's very related with temperature. When you have higher temperature, you have more methane emission. And here you can see this is just the methane coming out of bubbles, like they are bubbling out of the lake. So that was not so good in that sense. And we have made a budget. The CO2 emission in the lagoon was 0. But they, of course, when before flooding, they also emit, but when you put water on it, they are not emitting these 12,000 and 8,000 tons. But when we consider the methane emission of the freshwater lake, then we have 13,500 tons of CO2 equivalents. You have to convert methane to CO2. So everything that we save here, we are losing here in terms of climate. So yeah, but I must say the freshwater lake has a huge biodiversity of birds. So is all this trade-off? Should I make a lake to have the birds to come, but I also have a problem with the climate? In Grunstein, we also made facilities for outreach activities, and that was also very successful. We had a lot of, a big number of visitors. So if you want to engage society, make some recreation and some information. And here we also present our results in some posters that is in an open exhibition in close to the lagoon that was very well received by the guests. We also plan open science days where we come and give talks in these places, show the types of species, very important to make people aware of marine nature. And we have a big societal engagement. We have Facebook pages where people is following. And we had, in the beginning, was expected to come 5,000 to 10,000 guests in this area, but actually we have registered 80,000 guests per year. So that must have that's also a good indicator for knowing public engagement in your area. But it also must have an impact on tourism in some way or another that we haven't evaluated yet. I need some colleagues in social economics to help me with that. Okay, if you are a practitioner and if you want to learn more about nature-based solution, I don't know if you know about it, but there is a handbook of these nature-based solutions available in the internet. If you try to Google it. And is a result of all the Horizon 2020 projects funded in the last 5 years. And they, as I say in the beginning of my talk, they encourage you to use this approach. It's a long document. Just the summary for practitioners and policymakers is 350 pages, and the full version is actually 800 pages. So it's a bit heavy to be a practical guide. And it's mostly based on urban and terrestrial approach, because the nature-based solutions concept came first based on urban areas, if you know, green roofs and things like that. So it lacks the coastal adaptation part. And also lacks the standardized indicators, and the greenhouse gas aspect is also missing about what is the sustainable way of implementing your approach. So I was invited together with another group of experts to work on this mini handbook, which the idea is that will be much shorter. We were divided in thematic groups of experts, and I'm leading the coastal one. And we are working on what are the best indicators, and some of them I showed to you today here. And we're gonna combine them in this document. And this work is done together with a network Nature, which is a huge network. So if you want to know more about, you can Google network Nature, and you can find a lot of examples also of nature-based solutions. And the target group here, we are really thinking on the practical and useful, so practitioners and companies as well as researchers. And it's planned to be launched end of this year, but maybe will be a bit delayed. But yeah, and please, if you have experience and if you have used the other handbook, and if you have any comments, you're welcome to tell me, because we are now in the phase where we are writing it. So we want to improve as much as possible. So the summary of my talk, coastal adaptation as a nature-based solution can provide room for biodiversity, climate, and societal benefits, especially when you think about recreation. Some agricultural fields that are not being really profitable today, they can be turned into coastal lagoons, islands, or tidal marsh areas. These areas has a huge importance in biodiversity, and natural coastal protection is very important to try to give room to this nature to come back. Marine nature takes time to return and unfold the full potential of biodiversity, while the greenhouse gas benefits are immediate, when we are not considering the lake part, when we are only thinking about the coastal lagoon. The indicators on social benefits, at least in Greenstein, we saw a high level of engagement, and this is based on surveys and number of guests. And I have one more, that when you implement nature-based solutions, it's becoming now such a buzzword, and we don't want that to be a nature-based excuse, right, as using in the wrong way. So they are not a substitute for the phase out of fossil fuels. So you just have to think that you're doing this because nature needs to have a role. And yeah, they provide a lot of ecosystem services, as I mentioned, and it has to be implemented with the full engagement of communities and respecting their values. And again, it has to be implemented and designed to provide climate and biodiversity benefits. That's all from me. Thank you for listening.
Super. Tusind tak, Cynthia. Det var et rigtig spændende oplæg. Meget spændende at høre om jeres erfaringer og resultater nede fra Gyldensteen Strand. Det er spændende at høre, hvad I har gjort ved det omgivende miljø og den biodiversitet, der er derude. Og det bliver også spændende at se, hvad der kommer ud af jeres mini-håndbog, når den er klar her til forhåbentlig slutningen af i år. Det bliver spændende. Så håber I får en masse god input dertil. Vi må se. Men nu er der tid til at stille spørgsmål, og jeg har snakket med Cynthia, inden vi gik i gang. Hun har ikke en stram deadline her til 8:15, så vi kan godt fortsætte lidt ud over, hvis der skulle være flere spørgsmål. Men I er velkommen til at række hånden op og stille jeres spørgsmål, eller skrive det ud i chatten. Så er Cynthia klar til at svare.
Vi kan lige starte med et spørgsmål, der er blevet stillet i chatten, som leder rigtig godt op til det, du lige afsluttede med, Cynthia, som er fra Laurits Bernit, som skriver: How do you discern NBS from other constructive initiatives? When is something actually NBS?
Very good. Very good question. Well, I would say there are different types of, I had a slide before and I removed because I thought it was too much, but there are 3 types of nature-based solutions. One is no intervention at all, which is just making a conserved area like natural parks. This is actually a type of nature-based solution. Then you have the type 2, which is some degree of intervention, which is, for example, when you are restoring a forest with a specific species of tree, this is some degree of intervention. And then you have high level of intervention, where is actually the hybrid approach, where you have gray infrastructure, what we call concrete, and a little bit of nature. So there are different levels. If it's only gray concrete infrastructure without any green or room connection between water, then it's actually not a nature-based solution as such. I don't know if I answered the question, but yeah, we know there are different types. So.
Laurits, var det nok svar på dit spørgsmål? Ellers så er du velkommen til at komme tilbage. Nå, det er godt.
Jeg slår lige lyden til, min Tana, når tingene absolut ikke er NBS, hvor går skillelinjen for alvor? Where is the hard line in this?
Yeah. Well, when it's not nature-based solutions, then that's how it is, and we understand that in some situations you can't really work with nature. You have to provide some sort of protection, and in this case, that's just have to live with it. This you don't have a red line or a line of distinction. But if you only use hard, that we call hard solutions, then it's not a soft solution where you have nature. But that's just how it is. Sometimes you cannot implement nature in some way or another.
Okay.
Yes, but we are. Right now, there are a group of researchers, including me, where we are investigating also in these cases. For example, we had this Weiler case with the harbor. There is very difficult what to do, right? And that's why we needed to have different experts to come and judge, because it also has to provide protection. You cannot just remove everything and invite the water. It does have to follow up some, the scenarios, climate scenarios. So we are working on it. It's complex. I don't have an easy answer, but it's gonna come some models, and that's also what EU wants now in the new calls for projects. They are addressing specifically your question, Larry.
Okay.
So I think in 3 years or 4 years, I will be much better equipped to answer you.
Thank you.
Laurits har stillet one more question.
Yeah.
You seem to monitor marine species indicators on an annual scale. These species exhibit great temporal and spatial variation.
Yeah.
What is a good NBS indicator and how do you select?
So if you are monitoring a coastal lagoon, as I say, if you want to minimize as much as possible, you should follow the Water Framework Directive, and that's also what we're going to advise in this mini handbook, which is light in the water, because that is transparency. Is the light, is the water quality good enough? Chlorophyll in the water as well, because it's phytoplankton growth in some way or another. Then you have also some other indicators for the benthic species and the macroalgae species that is divided in coverage percentage. And that is something we're gonna implement. And if you have, we will, I don't know if it's a good idea to do annually. I think I would follow at least every season to see if there is any change. But right now in Gunstein, we reach a state where we don't need to look them so very often. So for the benthic species, we are only going once per year, but for the algae, we are still following every 2 months, because it's still something can be released from the soils. So yeah, but basically the Water Framework Directive indicators, it's something that we are looking into. But they are very good for areas that are deeper, 1 to 2 meters deep, right? But when we look into the very shallow coastal tidal marshes, it's actually not the same. Then it's plant species, coverage of different species, and this is, we are also working with the wetland and coastal wetland experts to find out what is the best.
Great. And then Anne Krausholt asked if you see great differences between east and west part of Gyldensten Laguna, and is it all related to fresh water versus salt water, or do you also have other parameters?
No, the fresh water and the salt water lagoon, they are separated by a dike, so they don't have connection. The west and east difference is because in the west, we have more water circulation. And in the east, we don't have so good water circulation. So if you want to make a coastal lagoon, I would advise with a very, very good water circulation, because that actually improves the ecological conditions. So the east is very sluggish in responding because the circulation of the water is not as good as in the west.
Thank you very much. And then there's actually, yeah, there is, I'm not sure that I will pronounce it correctly.
Chiara.
Chiara.
Yes.
Chiara,
Can
would
you
like
hear
to
me?
ask a question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. Hi, I'm from DTU, Technical University of Denmark, DTU Sustain. I work also with nature-based solution, but from the water services perspective, so as a solution to flood risk. And so I am very interested to the governance aspect because, how did you involve the different actors, specifically the utilities, how they, all the issue related to if there is a wastewater outlet or, combined sewer overflows and all the different elements of the interrelation between this natural coastal area and sewage system and, the water system, the water infrastructure, the technical one. And whether also, first answer this and maybe,
You mean the participation of the different
so
actors?
how did you manage that? And also, like, in that sense, it's the maintenance afterwards. Who is owning it? Who is actually maintaining it? Who's paying for it? Who is paying for the nature-based solution, and who is
Yes.
in
Yes.
charge of maintaining, because this kind of
Yes.
infrastructure, they really need a lot of maintenance. So
Yes.
how is
good.
that organized? That
Yeah.
would be very interesting, I guess, also for the municipality to know.
Yes. Very, very good question. And yeah, I didn't mention this at all. So regarding the involvement of stakeholders in the beginning of the project, they were consulted, and I had a student just studying about the public participation on this designing and planning before. And it was not, it was just made because it had to be made by regulation, you know, you have to put for hearing and things like that. So we were thinking now, what is the best way of improving this process? Because the people that were interested, they had to read the, what is the name, the environmental report, and that was 500 pages. It was very heavy. So can we help these people that are interested, the local people, should be more aware of this so they can contribute better? So that was one part. After when you implement the nature-based solution, this is a special case in Kunstein because it's owned by the Oviensen Foundation. And there they have a draft leader where you are maintaining the area in some way or another. So we need to maintain, and the co-management come with the University of Southern Denmark, we that are coming and telling the research results and monitoring results, what they have to think about. And because we have engagement of the society, we have volunteers counting birds every day from the DOF, which is really nice. And we have also engagement with the schools that are coming to use the facilities in the area in that sense. So there are a lot of volunteers that are watching the area. Hey, what is going on? When they see something different, they see often seals in the coastal lagoon. Oh, we saw a seal today. So it's really nice to have this follow up. But yes, we have a draft leader that is maintaining the operation of the lagoon, more the practical aspects, and we researchers, we monitor the lagoon.
What about the outlet, I said, of the water system? So it's combines your overflows. Are there any, or there is no interaction with the? Because usually municipalities that are at the coastal area, they have a huge issue related to the management of the sea level rise, or
Yes.
and the
Yes.
wastewater, I mean sewage system that have
Yes.
can get overloaded when it rains. So then
Yes. They have done the channel. There is no communication, so we were aware of this problem. We decided to not connect any water to the coastal lagoon, not any fresh water. So the stream that comes, it goes around the lagoon and goes out in the open sea. It doesn't communicate with the lagoon as such because we didn't want any influence of rainwater or streams whatsoever. So it's going around, it's designed as such as not go in the lagoon.
Okay.
So that's why we didn't want any fresh water coming because we know the problems of, exactly what you have said. So they thought about that and they have designed the stream just around the dike, the new dike that they built. Just behind the dike, there is a stream, a channel that collects all the water and goes right much further out of the lagoon.
Okay. So there is no involvement of the water utilities?
No.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
And that's all from the chat. So...
Er der flere spørgsmål ude i flokken her? Nogen, der kunne lyst til at stille et sidste spørgsmål, inden vi lukker af? Det lader det ikke til. Så tror jeg, vi siger tusind tak for de indkommende spørgsmål. Og lige inden jeg lader slippe for den her gang, så vil jeg lige kort informere om det næste kommende arrangement, vi holder på den anden side af sommerferien. Det bliver den 22. august, hvor vi i samarbejde med Kommunernes Landsforening holder endnu et webinar, hvor vi sætter fokus på kommunernes behov for og brug af digitale værktøjer til risikoberegning i forbindelse med oversvømmelser, hvor vi kigger på, hvad kan man bruge de forskellige værktøjer til, hvad er de velegnede til, og hvilke er gode at bruge, og hvilke er gode at bruge. Det er som sagt den 22. august, der er tilmelding frem til den 18. august, og der kommer en invitation ud til jer på jeres mail snarest muligt. Men ellers så vil jeg sige tusind tak for spørgsmålet igen. Tusind tak til dig, Cynthia, fordi du vil være med og holde et rigtig spændende oplæg. Og så må I ellers have en rigtig god sommer alle sammen. Ha' det godt.